welcome to our Short Stories, the Thrill of the Moment panel. We were supposed to present this panel at Bouchercon 2021, but since we're living in the time of COVID, the conference was canceled, as you know. So thank you for joining us virtually. Now I'm going to introduce you to our very talented short story authors, and I will go in alphabetical order. Ted Hertel is a retired military attorney. His first short story, My Bonnie Lies, was nominated for Anthony McCavity Awards and won Mystery Writers of America's Robert L. Fish Award. Ted has had several stories published since then, with the latest being The Little Sister in Crime, published last year in The Further Adventures of Ellery Queen. Ted has served on Mystery Writers of America's National Board for 9 years and is currently MWA's parliamentarian. Eleanor Cawood Jones is a self-identified romance novelist who only ever seems to write crime stories and just received a 2021 Derringer Award for The Great Bedbug Incident and The Invitation of Doom. Keeline had her first 2 short stories published in 2020, one of which was a finalist for the Derringer Best Short Story, and she is working on her novel while planning Bouchercon 2023 in San Diego. Claire A. Murray writes mystery, fantasy, and science fiction. In 2020, she had 2 short stories published, and her 9th short story, The Backpack, will come out this fall in the Desert Sleuths 2021 anthology, So West, Love Kills. A member of Sisters in Crime, Claire is a New England author transplanted to Phoenix, where she writes full-time, dabbles in painting, and lives on a steady diet of Zoominars for connection, inspiration, and sanity. Mark Thielman is a 2-time Black Orchid Award-winning author whose day job duties as a criminal magistrate include meeting prisoners in the basement of the Tarrant County Jail. His short fiction has been published in Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, Mystery Weekly, Black Cat Mystery Magazine, and various anthologies. He lives in Fort Worth with his wife, 2 sons, and an oversized dog. My name is Mary Monnin. I'm on the board of the Midwest chapter of Mystery Writers of America. And my latest short story, St. Killian's Choice, came out in January in Black Cat Mystery Magazine. So without further ado, let's take a look at why short crime fiction is the thrill of the moment. Janet Hutchings, editor of Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, reports that EQMM's print sales have been holding pretty steady under very challenging circumstances, and notes that the magazine had an uptick in digital format sales in 2020. So my first question is for Ted. So Ted, in addition to your short stories, you've written a number of critical essays on crime writers and their works. You're an expert on Ellery Queen and also review crime fiction for Deadly Pleasures Mystery Magazine and have received their Lifetime Achievement Award for fandom. I'd say you're more than qualified to analyze the appeal of short crime fiction. So what do you think it is about short stories that appeals to readers of mystery and crime?
Well, I think there are a few factors involved. One of them is that people in this day and age don't really seem to have a lot of time to read. I think that we find that those of us who are still working, I'm retired, but when I was working, when other people are working, they come home, they grab something to eat, they maybe sit down, take a look at the newspaper. There's just not a lot of time to work in reading a novel, a chapter at a time. When I was doing this, I'd get maybe 1 chapter read, and 2 nights later I get back to it and I couldn't remember where I left off and have to go back and check just to bring myself back up to date. Whereas with the short story, you say, well, this is a half hour. I can get this in before I go to bed or whatever. I can read a short story in its entirety if I'm on a commute, on a train. If I'm driving in a car, you can put a short story on tape or disc into your car and listen to that for a half hour while you're driving. So I think that that's really critical today, that people just don't have the time for it. Another advantage is you can read and finish a story in a single sitting. You don't have to worry about coming back to something, sort of as what I was alluding to before. but short fiction can be a great escape from the world. You get into a 400-page novel, after a while, maybe you get kind of sick of it, and you
I can understand
let
that.
it go and say, oh, I got this far, I might as well finish the thing.
Would everybody else agree with that? Is that pretty much?
I think that it's accurate. I also think there's just so much good short fiction writing nowadays. So those two things are like a recipe for happiness, I think. There's just so many good writers and so little time. And little bites are good.
I also think that the stories start, I mean, you don't have a lot of room, so you have to start right in action. Unlike some stories that, you know, it kind of slowly burns and gets started, and they build a world and it takes a while, and you're like, where's the body? What's happening? Short stories, they have to go fast. And that means that we really get into the whatever's going to happen right away.
Sounds good. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
I just don't think.
Well, go ahead, Claire.
I don't think people read long anymore. Even newspaper and journal articles, so many are so short, and people are skimmers. So when you give them a short story, they'll dive in and invest more in it because it's short.
Yeah, I agree. Mark?
I think it also gives you the opportunity to explore different places I would never go if I had to commit to a book. I finished a story yesterday that was not that I wrote, that I read in, it was, dynastic China. I would never pick up the book. I don't have that much interest, but I was curious, and it's 15 pages. Why not? So you can go a lot of different directions.
That's a good point. Those are all good points. So my second question goes to Claire. Michael Bracken, who is both a prolific short story writer and editor of Black Cat Mystery Magazine, has commented on the rise of small press mystery magazine and anthology publishers. So Claire, while 4 of your stories have been published in Kings River Life, several more have been in anthologies. One of your recent stories, Spirit in the Sky, came out in the anthology Peace, Love, and Crime fiction inspired by the songs of the 60s. Spirit in the Sky involves 3 Vietnam vets. So tell us a little bit more about that story and whether you prefer to come up with your own crimes or write to a themed anthology.
I'll start with that last part first, because I have a hard time writing to someone else's theme or general idea. And I discovered that I would always get too tied to the theme itself, and the story would derail. So I like to write a story and find the right venue for it. Having said that, though, one story, and Spirit in the Sky, it stands out so differently. The story call and an article about a mural being dedicated to Norman Greenbaum's one-hit wonder, Spirit in the Sky, both came out around the same time. And that song so evokes the late 60s and early 70s, which was a time of turmoil for a lot of us. And Greenbaum was born and raised in the city I'd lived in for 18 years. I'd worked there for 25 years. And the mural was going up in the back of a building I'd worked in. And I thought,
quite a personal connection.
This is calling me. So the story came fairly easily because I went from 69, 68, 70 in that era in Vietnam to the present with it, even in a short story. And the serendipity of everything just worked really well. And I was able to layer in a theme of family, 3 strangers meeting in Nam, bonding over the song, which became a lifeline of hope. All of that just came together. And then I was able to bring in a character for the resolution who was an Army recruiter. And because the Army is family to so many people. So I've really threaded that theme throughout.
Claire, that's a really nice tie-in. Mark, I wanted to go to you real quick and ask you, you and I both have a story in the anthology that won last year's Anthony Award for Best Anthology, Malice Domestic's Mystery Most Edible. Is your approach different when writing to a themed anthology versus your own inspiration? And my next question will be a follow-up to this.
I'd have to say no. I mean, I don't have, when I'm writing toward an anthology, I don't want to take the center of the plate, right? You don't want to try to take that story where about, what is the heart of the subject, because, well, unless you've been invited to participate, you know that a lot of people are going to be submitting on that particular topic. So to find something that embraces the edges, and so I think about it and try to find something there that like niggles at my attention. And if I can't find that, then maybe this anthology isn't right for me, and then I move on. And so in some respects, I'm kind of writing to my own imagination, regardless of which way I'm going. Now, let me follow that up real quickly and say, of course, then when the anthology gets released and all the stories are there, then of course I kick myself that I don't participate in that one, right? Like the rest of us, and say, oh, I should have. That's much more interesting than I imagined it to begin with. But that's my approach.
That sounds good. Does anyone else have a quick opinion on anthologies? Kim?
So I've only been published, it's going to be 3 this October, my 3rd story, and all of them are anthologies, and all of them were written specifically to the theme. In case of the first one, The Crossing, Crossing Borders was announced as the theme. It was for my Sisters in Crime anthology. I'd never written a short story before in my life. And I was like, well, crossing borders. I live near a border of Mexico. So I started thinking about it, and I ended up with a woman in her car.
Wait, I want you to hold that thought, because I'm going to ask you about that particular story in more detail in just a little bit.
All right. Well, then my 3rd anthology is about northern cemeteries. It's cemetery plots for the Sacramento chapter. And literally, I looked up Northern California cemeteries because it had to be set there. And I went, there's a cemetery outside San Francisco, and it has the grave of Emperor Norton, and that brought me into a story. So I do love themed anthologies. Plus, they have deadlines, and there's nothing better about getting writing done than a deadline.
I agree with that. I think we could probably all agree with that. Well, I'm keeping an eye on the time. I'm going to move on and ask my next question to Mark. So Mark, by day you're a criminal magistrate. Has that job inspired the 16 stories you've had published? And what was your most unusual source for a story?
I will give you the lawyer answer to that question. The answer to whether it inspires my stories is yes, no, and maybe, right? I've never taken all right, to back up. I go to the basement of the jail. I meet our most recently arrested people. They come in, some have been there long enough to be in the jail coveralls, but most people come in straight off the streets. And so you meet all sorts of people in all shades of dress and hygiene. And so I don't take their stories and retell them. That wouldn't be fair to them or much fun, frankly. But there are these, we're all life collectors. That's kind of the nature of this job, right? Is to find a little tidbit somewhere and say, well, that's cool. Let me do that. To illustrate, I'll be quick. I met a woman a man who had a shoplifting caper that was kind of interesting. I thought that he stole from a home improvement big box store, and he was clever about it. The better question, so I borrowed some of that to tell a story about, why does somebody steal? I mean, why do you need the money? I think those were the interesting human questions, but you need an entry point. And so having somebody shoplift, I don't know, my most interesting.
Well, if he had a clever way, that's always good.
Yeah.
Ted, in your essay, Legal Mysteries, You Can't Handle the Truth, you say, there is little that is really thrilling about real life legal work. Does that mean that no real life incidents have inspired your stories?
Well, a real life incident inspired the first story that I had published. It really wasn't a legal thing, but it was for the Mammoth Book of Legal Thrillers, and I submitted a story there. But it was based on a comment that my great aunt had made to me at her grandson's, my cousin's, wedding while I was still in law school. So this stuck in my head for years. She said to me, Teddy, why do you want to be a lawyer? All lawyers are liars, she said. And that comment stuck with me. And so I used that as the basis for, as I said, my first story, which was about a female lawyer that I named Bonnie Cunningham. And she basically used extra legal methods, let's say, in order to get her clients off. And I titled the story, My Bonnie Lies. And
that's great.
And that's the story that I got the Robert L. Fish Award for.
That's neat.
I've never shown that story to a lawyer who's ever said anything to me positive about it, however.
I bet it. Now, what about the rest of you? You girls, do you have anything in real life inspired your stories?
Oh, sure. I used to be a marketing director at a nonfiction publishing company where I was suffering from a grave lack of ideas from those around me. Now I've done an abrupt change of pace, and I work at the front desk at a really busy private airport. And I could probably get 100 ideas all day long of just the random things that people walk up and say to me and the things that have happened. And I actually think that's going to turn into my first full-length book if I can ever get around to finishing it. The story you're going to ask me about later was actually based on a real-life incident, so I will get to that later.
Okay, that sounds good. Oh, Kim, go ahead.
So I volunteer on a 1907 Baldwin steam locomotive as an engineer. And the novel I'm working on is about a woman who finds a body of a train volunteer while she's working at a train museum, doing basically what I do. It's my first novel. I went with the do what you know best approach. And it's a very male hobby, so it's very rare for women to be involved in it. And I was like, well, I want to show a woman's perspective on this. And trains are fun. I love trains. I've been doing this 20 years, so why not?
Cool. Very cool. Claire, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, one of my stories on Kings River Life is really based on a compilation of stories from clients. I used to work with low-income communities, and all the stories I could get from that, I used to do their taxes and provide counseling and do all sorts of things. And there's a lot of story gems in there, but you take and you piece it all together and create something different from it. So it's not any one person's story you're revealing, but it's a life story.
Like Mark said. Well, before we leave this topic, I want to weigh in on this one too. I was in the Air Force when I was younger and got orders for Ramstein Air Base. And we landed in Frankfurt on August 31st, 1981. And that was the day that USAFE headquarters at Ramstein was bombed by the Red Army faction. So my private eye, Michael St. Killian, is a former Air Force OSI agent who returns to the Ramstein area to ply his trade among the American community. And while I didn't give him, while his first case doesn't deal with that, with the bombing, I did saddle him with guilt over disregarding a tip that would have prevented a fictional bombing at Ramstein. So I've given him a flaw and also kind of worked out some of my demons too. So moving on, sometimes our inspiration comes from other authors. So this question is for Eleanor. Eleanor, you identify as a romance novelist, and that shows in your 2021 Derringer-winning story, The Great Bedbug Incident and the Invitation of Doom. Have romantic suspense authors influenced your writing? Which ones and what authors have influenced you in mystery or any other genre?
Oh, that's a great question. I do think I'm a romance novelist. It's just that somebody always dies, and I think that ruins the mood. And I guess I've turned to a life of crime at an early age because I got to read books like anything by Dick Francis was always lying around the house. And he was my first love as a mystery writer, and all of his wonderfully put together mysteries, all in Britain, always had a tinge of romance. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't, but there's always a love interest and a beautiful plot and humor. And that's my triumvirate, I think, for the ultimate read for me, is something funny, a little bit of romance, and a wonderful plot. So Dick Francis, Lawrence Sanders was a wonderful writer. If you've never read his Archie McNally series, those are wonderful. Short fiction, I've found in my adulthood that Stephen King is probably one of the greatest short story writers of all time. And if you haven't read Dolan's Cadillac, that's wonderful. Last but not least, my family is weird. The Night Before Christmas, we read The Night Before Christmas, but we also read a short story by Robert Bernard called Blown Up. It is the singularly most funny thing I think we've ever read. And the first line of it is, "Would you like another cheese and onion twisty?" And it goes on from there. It's got a lot about food in it, so maybe I like food too. But yeah, just there's so many good writers out there. And I know just everyone I read when I was young has truly, truly influenced me. And
you've given me some ideas on who to read. I haven't read Dick Francis. I have a lot of books upstairs that used to belong to my father, and I think I'll have to go dig them out. So before I ask anyone else, Kim, I want to ask you in particular, you're quite the Shakespeare scholar. Now, of course, we can all learn from the master, but is there any specific way in which Shakespeare has shaped your writing?
I wouldn't say he shaped my writing, but I do think there's some lessons we can learn from him. We treat him as literature with a capital L, but he was really the Aaron Spelling of his day. He was writing popular literature, things that didn't have a lot of respect, but that people enjoyed. He knew how to appeal to what people wanted to go see. He said anything controversial in a different country, so he couldn't be accused of being commenting on our day, kind of like Star Trek, talks about the 60s, but does it in space. So, it's not really us, but we all know it is. Shakespeare did that. He set them in exotic places in Italy and Greece and stuff, but he was really commenting on his culture safely. And then poetry versus prose, he would have highfalutin characters speak in poetry and lower class
you do that in your writing also?
I think the idea of changing the way people talk and how some characters do both in Shakespeare, I think it's interesting to look at what effect language has on character and character has on language. And I think that's probably something I've been thinking about with Shakespeare.
That's good. Anyone else have any authors that have particularly influenced them?
I think Shirley Jackson with The Lottery just twisted my head, and it made me view everything through a different lens. And I aim in my stories to always have something unexpected, so that's where I think that comes from. Although I blame Poe for my why I can write dark.
I'd like to steal that answer and just replace it with my answer, because that's Shirley Jackson, the lottery winner. Oh yeah,
She's a good one. We can move on. So my next question is to you, Kim. As short story author Nikki Dolson said on a recent panel, short stories linger with the reader. One of the aspects of short stories that gives them lasting impact is the endings. And your mastery of endings, Kim, is apparent in The Crossing, which appears in the San Diego Sisters in Crime anthology, Crossing Borders, and was a Derringer finalist this year. Did you know the ending before you started writing? Where do you start when you begin a story?
So yeah, I'm sorry I jumped ahead on that one earlier, but I tend to start with locations. I'm one of those people who thinks of a place and goes, that'd be an interesting place to find a dead body. And then I write. In this case, of course, there was no dead body. I started with a location because I went for the obvious. It's called Crossing Borders. I live near a border. I had recently read an article about the difficulty of border crossings and about something called gaviotas, which are they help people push into the line by blocking the line and letting someone come in. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I thought of a woman in a car and someone's come into the line ahead of her after she's been waiting for hours, because sometimes the wait around here can be hours if something's going on. And I haven't crossed the border since I was a teenager, so it was actually kind of hard. But yeah, this woman in her car on the worst day of her life, and she gets carjacked. And the whole story is just in her car, but I didn't know the ending. It just
that's interesting. I mean, I don't want to give anything away, but knowing the ending, that's interesting. What about, let me open it up to the whole panel. Who else? What do you start with when you start a story? What sparks that idea initially?
I don't know that
Let's let Ted go.
Go ahead, Ted.
Sorry, Mark.
No?
I like to have the ending in mind before I start the story so that I know what I'm writing to. Doesn't always turn out that way. I have one story that's still sitting in my computer that I wrote years ago. And only recently did I come up with something that I considered a significantly better ending. But that's very unusual. With my other stories, almost all of them, I've known where I want to end up and have a final line or so that that's the twist, or what I hope that at least to some people will be a shock ending. So,
sounds good. Mark?
I like to know where the ending is. I'd like to have I like to plot because I like to have a twist, and it's much easier to have a twist if you can engage in the setup. But I've also found that I can spend so much time, worrying about where the story's going to go. There's the paralysis by analysis element of it that, I think I credit Michael Connelly with saying that you can fix bad words, but you can't fix no words. It's whether, so at some point I just have to start. And I start writing, and at some point you see a line, and I follow it, and then once you get it down, I can go back and revise at will. The readers only see the last version.
That's true. Very true. Eleanor?
I oftentimes start with the title. If I think of a title, I go from there, but I really have to know where the body's going to be. I don't know what that says about me. I was once on a private tour in Cornwall in England, and I was stuffed in a van with 6 or 7 elderly British ladies and a very handsome tour guide. And we spent the entire trip trying to figure out where we would hide a dead body in Cornwall. And that was, I guess I started that conversation. And at the end of the tour, the guide presented me with a bouquet of poison flowers. He went out and picked them as we were driving along. Why I have not written a story about that, I don't know. So I think I'm going to just write that down. Cornwall flowers. Thanks, guys.
I think you should. Claire, how about you?
I almost never know where it's going to end. And the one time I started with the ending, by the time I started at the end and worked backwards, and by the time I did that, I realized I had the wrong killer and had to go to the ending and change it. So it just, I spend more time on the setup in the beginning than I do on the ending. I never know where it's going to go.
Well, my next question is for you, Claire. Another important element of short stories is voice. It must be engaging to draw the reader in. So Claire, you write in several different genres. How do you find a particular voice for a particular story?
It sometimes takes me a while to differentiate the different characters' voices and nail it for that particular person and in a way that fits the story. Ironically, I recently said during a write-in that I can't write funny. I am funny in person, but I can't write funny. I'd forgotten, though, that when I write in first person, I can write funny. And I'm doing that now with a short story. But I visualize first. I see my character. Is he sitting with his feet up on the desk, chomping on a cigar, slugging down a shot of whiskey, listening with half an ear to the poor bugger who's, asking for a favor? And then that character will probably have a raspy voice, feel self-important, and may decide yes or no on a whim. So now I've got my character, and it goes from there. Or I ask what's happened in that character's life to influence how they think, how they view the world. That backstory, you have to create that to know and project what the character is going to do. Does the woman feel in control of life, or has somebody cheated her or cheated on her? How educated is the person? That's going to affect how they speak, what words they use. Will they swear a lot, a little, not at all? And what do they do for a living? Because sometimes that dictates, how you speak or what's expected of you. And are they someone who switches between dialect and proper speech? as happens in many families. And then I ask, is there someone in my own background who can be a model for that? And I actually have a character in a novel that's not yet published who just, I worked with someone who was just so perfect for this character. Her speech pattern, her actions, her way of interrupting all the time. She was great.
She'll recognize herself.
Probably not.
Does anyone else have a particular way, something way they get into the voice of their characters that you'd like to share?
Doesn't anybody else have characters that just show up in their head and start talking, or is that just me? I'll just pipe down now.
We make the voices in our heads work for us.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, let me move on then. In looking at the heyday of short crime fiction, Janet Hutchings says that there was a time when readers couldn't wait to see what was next for their favorite series character. I know that I, as a reader, enjoy new stories with a sleuth that I'm familiar with, that I've seen before. So my next question is for Mark. So Mark, 3 of your stories feature the Spud Stud. So tell us about your detective and the trouble he gets into.
Well, my narrator is a private eye private eyes don't have insurance. So his side hustle is he's a marketing rep for the Potato Advisory Board. Mostly that carries him to grocery stores, grand openings where he dresses up as various kinds of potatoes. It's an absolutely true to life, ripped from the headlines story that you see every day. But it's fun and it's silly. And so that's my guy. And, he's always, of course, tripping over dead bodies in the grocery stores. You read them, it's the sort of place that grocery stores should come with a warning label, right? So he, but that's my guy. And they're fun to go back to. They're fun. The locations are fixed. I don't have to spend a lot of time. We all know what grocery stores are like. You
go into great detail about the variety of potato that he's
listen. Some of the best fun is to go to the best produce section in town and to be wandering around picking up the root vegetables, deciding, is this one firm enough to actually stab somebody with? Wash your vegetables before you eat them, because there are people like me touching them. And although it's fun to see your friends that you've known, I think with a short story where they're paced a year or so apart, it's not like a novel where you have a real developmental arc. I mean, I can have him go to a different store, find a different body, and I think I can engage you in a story, and you don't have to see his, nuanced growth over time like you would with a series character in a novel.
Very good point. So my next question goes to Ted. One type of story that's popular right now and features series characters is that pastiche, where an author takes a well-known character like Nero Wolfe, Sherlock Holmes, or Ellery Queen, and writes a story featuring that character. So Ted, you're an expert on Ellery Queen, both the fictional detective and the authors, and have written Ellery Queen pastiches. Tell us about writing them. Did you keep Ellery in the past, or have you brought him into modern day? And how do you accommodate reader expectations?
Well, the Ellery Queen story that was published last year was actually written for a chapbook a number of years ago. And the editors of a series of 2 books now, and that may be the end of them, but entitled The Misadventures of Ellery Queen, we're looking for stories that had been previously published in Ellery Queen or elsewhere. And I had written this little story for a chapbook for a friend of mine that was distributed to, a dozen people or so, just for the heck of it. But I needed to create, because the story was called The Little Sister in Crime, I had to create a little sister fictitiously, or fictitious characters, named Hillard, to assist him, she thought, in the solution of the crime. And it was set at a also fictitious, obviously, Bouchercon in 1940, I think the year was. We had to write for this book, again, a themed anthology to certain topics. So I set Ellery there and brought in his father. I brought in Sergeant Bealey, and it involved the murder of Barnaby Ross, which is referenced in the Roman Hat Mystery, the first Ellery Queen book. So I tried to maintain everything with the challenge to the reader, which had been very important in the early Queen books, as well as maintaining the thought process of Ellery and how he actually went about solving the murder. So I tried to be as faithful as I could to it. And I guess the editors liked it enough that they thought it would fit in with what they were doing.
Yeah, clearly they did. Does anyone else write pastiches or have a continuing character? No, because I know Eleanor, the great bedbug incident has potential for sequel. Do you have another crime planned for your heroine and her love interest?
Well, now that you mention it, it hadn't really occurred to me, but at the end of this story, she is back on her way to England, and which has nothing to do with spoiling the story. She's back on the way to England, and she's going to meet her love interest again, and her favorite author is there again. So why not? So let's see what we come up with. But I do have actually written 4 stories now. I just came out with the, I've written 4 stories with 2 female accidental detectives, Lori and Martha, and they keep showing up. And let's see, the second story just came out. It's called Cabo San Loco, based in Cabo San Loco. I can't talk. That place in Mexico that I went on vacation. It's based there. And then the first story in that series is actually coming out in September. So it's backwards, but fortunately they're standalones. So 2 down, 2 to come.
Very cool. Okay, so just very quickly, Eleanor, how do you fit the thrill into thrilling short stories with so few words to work with?
I'm really all about setting the reader up. And this is just occurring to me on the spur of the moment, but if you get your reader into the characters and they start to care about the characters and they know something about the character's past, and as someone said earlier, how they're thinking, you can rook them into the character's life. So when something unexpected happens, or when the character themselves actually commits the murder, I think it can be quite surprising and quite thrilling, especially when you have that unexpected ending that you can pull in. And I forgot to mention something. Please indulge me for a second, but mystery writer Barb Goffman called me right before this Zoom meeting, and she said, you should go check your mailbox. And I did, and I got the award, the Derringer Award, in the mail today.
Oh,
that I was
yay!
Congratulations.
Congratulations. About it, Bouchercon, and I'm not going to get to do that, so I'm indulging myself here. And
yes.
Congratulations to my fellow nominee, Kim, who's on this panel as well. So
yeah, that was a huge honor to be on that list with you, Eleanor. Your story.
And as a real honor, Kim. I enjoyed your story.
I'm glad we got to see it too. Well, Kim, let me ask you, do you think you can have an entire traditional detective story with suspect interviews, red herrings, and the traditional bits in 5,000 words or less?
It's hard. I just found that out. My third story is the first of the short stories I wrote that has that element. The first 2 were I kept them short, in fact, shorter than 5,000, because they were very contained. The first one's just an hour in a car. So it was easy to stay within the word limit. The second one's one night at a poker game with a con artist and it goes wrong. But this next one, the finding of the body, and I've got this teenager, she's found this body, she's trying to figure out who the woman is because she's concerned that she's going to stay nameless, which is what the name of the story is. And she's going around talking to people, and there's all this stuff going on.
And is it hard to fit that in?
Yeah, my first draft was almost 9,000 words, and I had to cut and cut and cut. I had lists of words I needed to look at. I ended up having to cut several jokes that I thought were really good, but I just didn't have the room. And if I was
words on the cutting room floor, oh gosh.
And then the ending. I mean, if I was going to get to the ending in the 5,000 words, I had to sacrifice a lot of the early stuff, which I thought was really fun stuff. But
5,000 words was just my arbitrary.
That's what the anthologies all were, though. So yes, all of my anthologies I was published in was 5,000, and the first two, that was easy. I was like 3,000, 3,500. So I didn't worry about it.
Okay, well, I'm gonna cut some words here because we've got about 10 minutes left. So thank you. So we've talked a lot about what makes short stories fun and thrilling to read and write, and a little bit about where we get our inspiration from. So let's take one more look at inspiration. Ted, on email, you brought up a quote by short story writer Ed Hoke. If you read the newspaper and can't come up with at least 8 ideas for a story, you're not trying hard enough. Do you think this is true?
8 may be a little high for somebody with my total lack of creativity, but I think that certainly you can go through the newspaper every day, and there's going to be something, I think, that will trigger your imagination, and can at least come up with 1 or 2 stories out of a daily newspaper. They're shrinking in size, so maybe we have to take that into account too, in terms of how much material there is that's worthwhile to do anything with. But yeah, I think that that's, and who am I to argue with Ed Hope, for crying out loud, you know?
That's right.
Well, somebody mentioned the newspaper articles are getting shorter, so I guess we could read more headlines. But so I agree, newspapers are a great source of inspiration. I am what I call cursed with a creative imagination, and I can always think of some. So as a closing activity, let's demonstrate for the audience how a devious crime writer's mind works. So we have each picked out a headline and come up with a short story plot inspired by that headline. So let's go ladies first. Claire, go ahead and read your headline and give us the plot you came up with.
Would-be kidnappers drown themselves in the process. It was a funny story when I read it too. But so my story is Gus and Joe planned to kidnap Sally, take her out to the middle of the lake in the dark and drown her. Neither one really knew how to drive a speedboat, and they didn't bother to put on life vests. Neither one could swim. Sally didn't go down lightly. In fact, she didn't go down at all.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Oh, Kim, how about if you go next?
Sure. So my headline was that the California drought brings out the magic dowsing people. And I was like, oh, okay. So I imagined that a farmer, rather desperate in this time of no water, brings out one of these guys with the sticks to try to find water, and instead they find a body. And then, because I've read another article recently that I've been thinking about a lot, the California avocado thefts, I'm guessing it has something to do with people. It's a big business nowadays to go in at night and steal people's avocados.
Oh, interesting. Go ahead, Eleanor. Read your headline to us.
Well, I was Googling and I found this wonderful site where NPR puts out crazy headlines from the day. And this isn't an exact quote, but it's basically, build your journalistic chops and your receptionist skills and change your life. And basically there's a one ad in West Virginia where they're advertising for a journalist, and they'll give you a free room at an old hotel, but you have to agree to work the front desk a couple of days a week. First of all, I might actually apply for this job because I think it sounds really cool. But second off, you know, you think of the woman with the journalism background, she's bored with her life and her husband's left her, and she thinks, well, I'll just move to West Virginia and take this job. And she moves into this old hotel, and it turns out the paper is so small, they only have one computer, so she has to type up all of her stories by hand on her old typewriter and turn them in. But of course, there's a ghost living in the hotel, a handsome ghost. And when she leaves the room, he often types up her stories for her. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm actually going to write this, and I think I'm going to name all the characters after you guys. First names only.
I'll definitely want to read that. Go ahead, Claire. Oh, Claire's already gone. Sorry. Mark.
Okay. Well, I'm going to end up sounding like I only write food stories. But so I didn't get a chance to look at today's paper. It was the day job got in the way. But the Texas State Fair picks the 10 Big Tex Award finalists. those were all of the fabulously over-fried concoctions that are, they're going to be offered at the state fair. And it's an intense competition. It is the Super Bowl of ridiculous fried food here. If I can, real quick, the deep fried Halloween, the dish starts with a large chewy pretzel, then tops with candy corn syrup, rainbow sprinkles, powdered sugar. Then it's deep fried. They add orange and white buttercream icing, M&Ms, Reese's Pieces, mini Twix, Oreo cookie crumbles, and some more candy corn. Then it's marshmallow whipped cream, a Reese's peanut butter cup, Hershey's chocolate syrup, caramel sauce, and a little more candy corn drizzle. So I've got a character. I mean, okay, that's the real life. Now, you have to make it fiction, right? So, but I think he's obviously suffering from, recent bypass surgery. I like Stuart Pitt as his name. He calls himself Amarillo because Stu Pitt just is, his friends make fun of him. He dies when the 55-gallon drum of cooking oil falls on him. Was it a horrible accident, or was it, murder by one of the jealous competitors? Well, you'll have to read the story to see.
Yes,
Mark, Mark, what state fair was that? Because I really want to go and try that.
Well, look, they've got a way. This is the Texas State Fair. And if you Google Big Tex Food Choice Awards, you can get the complete listing of all of them. It really is a fabulous list to look at.
And that's why he's from Amarillo, where they have the big Texan.
Yes, ma'am.
Drive by that billboard frequently. Ted, go ahead.
Well, this is a curious coincidence because my story comes out of the Wisconsin State Fair and doesn't involve that kind of food, but I'll just hold this up and see if this shows up at all. But this is, okay, State Fair heavyweight champion, okay? And that's the basis for my story. I've got four, this was in this morning's Milwaukee Journal. And the animal that they're talking about weighed 1,399 pounds, not 1,400, but 1,399 pounds, and sold for $47,500, which comes out to about $34 a pound for this thing. So four small-time criminals decide that they want to kidnap the winner of this competition. They've heard how much championship horses make when they get put out to stud, and they figure they can do the same thing with this animal. So they break into the fair late at night. There's light security, not a lot going on, and figure that they can load this thing into a truck and get away before getting caught. But in the process, the animal doesn't go along with their plans, stomps on one guy's foot, breaking it, headbutts another one into a wall, cracking some ribs, and so forth. All hell has broken loose. And of course, security hears this noise. They come in and investigate, and the men get arrested. And in their confession, they say why they were stealing the steer, because they wanted to put it out the stud. And the cops tell them, well, look, this is a steer, okay? And a steer is castrated somewhere between birth and 4 months old. So you're never gonna, get any stud service for this guy. Nice. And one of the guys says, really? No bullshit. And that's the end of the story. So.
Great ending. All righty. So I got everybody, didn't I? Except myself.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
sure.
Great stories, guys.
Please.
Okay, so my headline is from the Stars and Stripes newspaper. It's Dallas Towing Company to pay $50,000 for illegally selling cars belonging to service members. So my plot that I came up with is this. James was certain that the take from that bank job was safe in his car while he was in basic training. His car would be respected. After all, didn't everyone thank soldiers for their service these days? Down on his luck, used car detailer Raul was certainly thankful. And that's just my quick plot. So there you have it. Crime writers at work. So thank you, everyone. Before we go, I'd like to ask each of you to tell the audience what you've got coming up next. So I'm going to just go around circle here. Mark, go ahead. What have you got coming up next?
Well, excuse me. My next story, The Map Dot Murder, will be out in the September-October issue of Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine. And then they just told me they're going to have another one in the November-December. So I'll have a couple here before the end of the year.
Nice, nice. Eleanor, how about you?
Let's see, I have a couple more stories coming out this year. One of them is in the Bold anthology, and it's called All My Exes Die in Texas. And then in February, my fourth Martha McBain and Laurie George mystery is going to come out. It's called The Lion Witch in the Wardrobe.
Ooh, very good. Nice. Ted?
I have a novel that I've got an agent that's currently shopping around. I don't anticipate a lot of success. She's had it for a bit of time. But, you know, I keep my fingers crossed every day that maybe I'll actually hear something from her. I've got a few thank you. I've got a few short stories that are in process, but nothing that's scheduled has been accepted at this point until I write my story about the steer anyway. See what I can do with that. That's
going to be great.
It is. Claire, what have you got coming up?
Well, the backpack comes out in the Desert Sleuths So West Love Kills in September. And also in September, the short story, no, that's January. I have another short story coming out. I forgot the name of it. And then I just heard last night from Bethlehem Writers Roundtable, my short story with them took honorable mention, and they'll publish it in January. That's Nanani and Shishkatami. That's a fable. And then the other one that's coming out, is the Southwest Writers Competition. I won't know till October what place I took, but gosh, I can't remember which story it was. I'm juggling about 30.
I like so many. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Kim, what have you got coming up?
So in October, Cemetery Plots, the anthology for Sacramento, comes out with Nameless, which is sort of a Nancy Drew inspired teenager finds body on the grave of Emperor Norton in Colma, California. And I think they're doing an audiobook in December.
Wonderful, wonderful. For myself, I'm working on my next St. Killian story. And in May, my debut mystery novel, Death in the Aegean, will come out from Level Best Books. So thank you all for spending your time with us. We hope you've enjoyed it. We have enjoyed presenting our panel to you. So see you on the next go round, and good night.